let me just ask you something philosophically, Bruntz, because everybody's going to point to the 8th inning and a couple plays they didn't make defensively, and I get that. But I want to go all the way back to like the 5th inning, and whether we get to the exact specifics of the rotation, like 1 out, go to the bullpen, 2 outs here, that, not necessarily that as much as in an inning like that, where it seems very particular and you have a plan or can look a little impatient. Do you think, did you get a handle on what Nebraska was trying to do with their rotation last night? Situationally? Did it make sense real time to you?
Yes and no. I mean, I think part of, I think they were a little bit, because they used 10 pitchers last night, and it felt like they were a little bit of kind of prisoners to the weekend, I guess, from the standpoint of like, Brockett was only going to throw like 40 pitches because I think there's a pretty strong chance you see him on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think they were going to try and pass the bucket anyways. And I think they got a little situational as well. The 5th, are you talking about Clark specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was kind of getting hit a little bit. I think they were probably, I don't know if there was something that they saw that they needed to go and get him as quickly as they did. I thought, you know, they probably could have left Perry in for another batter or two late. It felt like he was throwing okay. But they've kind of gone matchup in the back of the bullpen a little bit more recently. And I think sometimes they were just, I think on some of the guys, it was like, okay, let's just get them in there, get them a few pitches, and then, you know, make sure that they're available for the weekend. But it's hard in college baseball to use that many pitchers and, you know, have it go well. And, you know, you've seen it a couple times in the midweeks for guys that, you know, you've counted on the weekend sometimes just don't have it, or, you know, I don't know if it's a focus thing or what, but, you know, they just gave it up late. And, you know, South Dakota State's a team that their offensive numbers, they can hit for power. That's the one thing that they can do. And I mean, most college baseball players nowadays, if you leave 90 up in the zone, they can make you pay. And those weren't cheap home runs they hit in the later innings last night against Nebraska. So, and as you know, as much as you want to point to the pitching issues towards the back of the game, I mean, hell, you had bases loaded with 1 out in the first inning, and you only get 1. And you know, Nebraska had a lot of chances in that game to early put it out of reach, and wasn't able to do it. I mean, that's kind of, I went back and looked at the numbers after the game. You know, they're 1-6 in midweeks since the calendar flipped to April. I want to say that they're, I checked it. I was actually surprised that the average was this high, but they're hitting like 270 with runners in scoring position in those 7 games, and they're leaving an average of 9 or 10 a game. So,
you ever seen a team that when they misplay a ball, it comes back to haunt them the way it does Nebraska?
You mean Brockett getting his 10 inning
like what was the
catcher?
What was that?
Yeah, I mean the
8th inning was no defensive gym either.
No, I mean, and that's, you kind of wonder at that point. It's almost a mental thing, you know. It's guys trying not to make mistakes. And I mean, we asked Josh Overbeek about it last night after the game. If like,
is he healthy?
You know, the narrative is out. The narrative's out there. They've heard the narrative. They've been asked about the narrative. Like it almost just felt like guys were playing a little bit scared in the late innings, and you can't play that way. I mean, that's how you boot a ball. That's how you almost kind of get luck made for the other team in some ways. So yeah, I mean, they played the hits last night for sure with some of the issues they've had in midweeks. I mean, it's really not just one thing that's been the issue.
All right, let me ask you one other thing, because I want to go back to the 5th inning, because this kind of set it up. Number one is, do you think Wordley's going to be the closer? And if he is, Why do you think the 5th went the way that it did when he came back in the 6th to at like in that juncture of the game?
You got to remind me.
So he came in the 5th. He got the one out, the last out, right? Then he pitches the 6th, and then that was it.
Like you're asking why they didn't just keep rolling with him?
That, or if he's gonna be, you think he's gonna be their back end guy?
I think in an ideal, I think this is the way they would like it to go.
Okay.
I think they would, and it's played out this way a couple times.
Okay.
This season where they like him on Friday nights because there's a chance that if you can get Sears to like the 6th or the 7th,
mm-hmm.
you can just roll Worsley the rest of the way.
Okay.
And you basically have the entire bullpen available for Saturday and Sunday. And, I would be okay with him being the back end guy. I think he's actually been hard enough on both righties and lefties this year. Like his numbers have been pretty good,
mm-hmm.
but I think there's kind of that thing of we're going to set the tone on Friday night with our guy Sears. We can get I think they think he's the best reliever that they have, and I think they'd want to use him earlier in games and try to kind of get an extended outing to kind of really set the tone on Friday night.
Okay.
So I think I haven't been told that that's kind of the idea, but if you just kind of look at the way that they've used him the last month or so, it went from like, okay, he's a situational lefty to, okay, he can give us multiple innings to, okay, he's the first guy out of the pen on Friday nights because we can trust him to go multiple innings and get up and down a couple times. So that's my read on it. We'll see if that changes.
You mentioned Overbeek. How healthy do you think he is or isn't?
I think he's pretty healthy. I think it took him a while to come back from that finger. I mean, I think he was really kind of playing through it. I don't know how comfortable he is as a leadoff hitter. I think he's looked okay at times there, but with not having Brumbaugh in there still, I mean, you've kind of had to shuffle things a little bit, and they're getting Sanderson in the lineup now every night, which I think is great, just given how good he is.
Yeah, I remember a month ago we were like, "Oh, how's that going to play out to get both of them in the lineup?" And we've seen it now.
You just jam them into right field and don't really care about the defense. That's how you do it.
Hey, just like Little League, baby.
It's easy sometimes, right? But no, I mean, I think Overbeek's been fine. I think if you go back to March, we were talking about how great Nebraska was with 2 outs, how great they were with runners in scoring position, and those things kind of go in streaks. And right now, it just feels like it's been such a struggle to get big hits for this team. I mean, they had one hit with runners in scoring position last night. That's something that you got to figure out, because I think they've done a pretty good job actually of setting the table, but they just haven't been able to show anything for it.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Bruntsy, am I the only one that feels like I'm taking crazy pills the way that college coaches deal with midweek pitching staffs? Because I just cannot, for multiple reasons, cannot see a world in which throwing 10 different guys out there makes any sense. First and foremost, and you hinted at this earlier, you're not going to find 10 guys that pitch well on the same day ever.
Mm-hmm.
Just not happening.
Right?
Full stop. Yep. Never going to happen. Right? So the fewer guys that you have to send out there, in my mind, is an advantage because you've got a better chance of fewer guys throwing well. Second, I know they're like, oh, we're trying to save arms for the weekend. Using 10 guys doesn't seem super advantageous for that, especially when your weekend series starts on Friday. Now, I know some of these guys didn't throw a ton of pitches, but if you're telling me Jackson Brockett can't throw, 60 pitches on Wednesday, have 3 full days of rest, and then relieve on Sunday, like, am I to believe that's really that big of a deal? Because, I mean, we've seen it happen a ton. Like, I just feel like none of this makes any sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach, and I think Brockett might start on Sunday. I mean, in all honesty, I don't know if it's going to be just a relief thing with them. Like, I could see him just being like, okay, Sunday's yours.
Sure, but you could throw 60 on Wednesday and 60 on Sunday and nobody's none the wiser. Like, it doesn't, like, you're fine.
Right. What I'm saying is I think they want to leave the door open for like 100 on Sunday if they can. But I think the problem that I mean, you get so exposed with your lack of starting pitching sometimes with midweeks. Because, yeah, I mean, I think if Nebraska was, if you hooked them up to the polygraph and said, what would be your ideal on midweeks? I mean, the ideal would be is that you would have somebody like, let's say, like Clark or Drew Christo or Will Walsh or somebody like that who could basically go and do not necessarily exactly what Brockett did last week with the no-hitter, but a guy that could potentially go in there and give you 5 or 6 on consistently on Tuesday and Wednesday. And this team just does not have that. And
that doesn't seem like a huge ask.
Let me finish. What I'm saying though is that the problem is, and that they've run into, is that you've got guys that can give you 2, but not consistently. And I think sometimes last night I think you could have let guys go a little bit more, and you could have had Perry go a full inning, and you could have maybe stuck with Clark a little bit more. And you try to get to, like, let's say we're going to use like 6 or 7, like max on a Wednesday, versus 10, because it also just kind of gives the feeling of just being a little bit unsettled on the roster, right? If you're just constantly running out there. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think sometimes, especially when you get to this point of the season, it's like you got a month left. You just kind of need to bear down a little bit and throw some extra pitches if you have to, just to get it done. So yeah, I agree with you, Ravi. I mean, I think there's different ways of doing it. I have never loved the bucket brigade approach, because it always feels like even when things are going well, you get into the 6th or the 7th, and somebody inevitably has a bad inning, and that's how you lose a midweek. So
you guys know,
I agree with you.
You know what's interesting, Bruntz? It's such, and I'm sure, like, we probably have to take a deep dive to compare pitching numbers year over year from this year to last year in terms of hard numbers. But you know what Nebraska doesn't do for a team that's kind of struggled out of the bullpen? They don't walk a lot of guys. Like, it seems like they should be more efficient given how few of free passes they actually give up. It's kind of a statistical anomaly.
No, it's funny. I mean, like,
do you agree?
Yeah, they don't walk a ton of guys. I mean, actually, if you go to what Rob wanted to do at the start of the season with the strikeout to walk ratio, I mean, Nebraska's ahead of schedule there by a pretty significant margin. I think last week they were top 25 in whip, and really kind of have been around the zone. I mean, I think in some situations they've kind of been a little too much around the zone. But I think that when you kind of look at some of these midweeks, I mean, they've given up big hits. I mean, thinking, last night,
couple bombs,
2-3 run homers.
Creighton had the big bomb
to Creighton down here, kind of the same way, where you leave one pitch up, and that's all she wrote.
I mean, what was last night, like 6.5 to 1, or I don't know if they had 13 or 14 Ks, but I only had 2 walks. I don't know what that math is off the top of my head, but something like that.
There have not been many games this year where they've just really kind of put guys on base a ton, and they, part of that too is even when they've had guys that have gotten a little bit wild, they at least feel like they have arms they can go to, so a guy doesn't have to just kind of sit out there and wear it. So yeah, I mean, it's been a hard team to kind of wrap your arms around this year, because it's, they started off so hot, the midweek struggles being what they are, and they still, are pretty competitive on weekends. So how do you kind of fit that type of a team really neatly into a box? I mean, I kept refreshing Warren Nolan last night because I was kind of curious to see how far they were going to drop, because that's a bad RPI loss. And
What it ended up being
only,
10 spot. Well, Nolan wasn't up when I first got here, but it's 30, and I think they're 26th in Kimpom now.
they were the
I
whoever
should
the
look.
NCAA uses had them at 24 last night. They're down to 30 today. So that just kind of tells you, I guess, how much they actually did at the start of the season in terms of beating quality teams. But I mean, that's the frustrating part, was that you just you were pretty consistent to start the year, and now you're just kind of it feels like you're just kind of, game to game. It's you kind of don't know what you're going to get.
Bruntz, is it putting too fine of a point on this conversation to say, like, hey, if Drew Christo or Will Walsh or Caleb Clark, or, like if one of those guys had been who Nebraska either thought they were or needed them to be, that we would not be having this discussion right now?
It would certainly change it, right? I mean, you're still searching for a Sunday starter, and we're in the second week of May right now. If one of those guys could have consistently given you 5 innings on Sunday, that picture looks a heck of a lot different, probably.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like last year.
Yeah. Well, and they've had a guy go 5 innings once on a Sunday. I mean, that's just kind of unbelievable. That you couldn't have one guy just kind of a couple times catch lightning in a bottle and get you through 5. And that's where the Sunday guy and that midweek role, I think, are kind of similar, and that's the problem. I mean, I think they have more pitching depth. I think there's just a particular kind of depth that they're still lacking, and that's not to let the offense off the hook either. I mean,
I agree.
You should not you should not have to hold up 4 runs or 5 runs on a midweek. I mean,
they ran 2 guys out last night, Bruntzy, that had double-digit ERAs.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it was a guy with a 7.7 ERA and a guy with a 12 ERA and
an 11.
And then they bring a guy out in the 9th that's throwing 98. Like it was kind of hard to wrap your head around. But I mean, that's a team that got swept by Northern Colorado and gave up almost 40 runs on the weekend. So that should have been a group that Nebraska could have handled.
You'd like to get more than 6 on them, is what you're saying.
This is the one.
What I'm saying.
This is the one time, or maybe the anti-Creighton thing, where I would say, because I got so sick of the they just want it more thing. I don't think that's it. I just think, Creighton was clutch in a lot of key spots against Nebraska, and you got to kind of give them some credit. But this is one time that I think the opponent did not clearly get Nebraska's utmost attention. Like I'll listen to that discussion this week after last night.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
No, that's a fair discussion, I think, after that one. I mean, even Overbeek said, that's the kind of the extra challenge when you play, Summit League teams in the midweek, or if you're Iowa, you play Loras College or something like that. And he said it's kind of like the World Series for those guys, and you can feel the extra intensity from visiting teams. And South Dakota State's played 6 home games this year. Like they are not afraid to go into another team's ballpark and try to win baseball games. I mean, that's the thing that is always kind of remarkable about those teams to me. Like North Dakota State, they played a series at LSU. They don't play home games until May. I mean, those teams are just completely comfortable in those types of situations. And, I think, Nebraska kind of needs to be able to throw that knockout punch early offensively with those types of games, and didn't do it. And then that's how you find yourself trying to protect a 1-run lead in the 8th inning. So, yeah, I mean, I'd listen to that conversation more after last night than, what you saw against Kansas or Creighton, which, are both kind of fringe NCAA tournament type teams, RPI was.
Bruntzy, with what's left on the schedule as far as Indiana and Michigan State, what are the chances Nebraska still has of trying to host one of those regionals after last night's loss? Is that just gonzo?
No, I think we can probably put that. I mean, it was
You were
You were
one of
kinda
the
tucking
few
that
that
one
wasn't
in.
buying into it last week either. There were some other guys that were like, hope springs eternal. You told me, you're like, nah, I don't really see it.
I mean, there was an outside chance, and you're kind of you needed Nebraska to get hot. I mean, I guess maybe you start this weekend and do it. I'll at least entertain that possibility.
Now you're putting yourself in
and-
a position where you're going to get like a top 10 regional seed now. At least before
Yeah.
last night, you could have been on the back half of a regional seed.
Yeah, well, I was surprised. One of them had them in North Carolina regional with the national 5 seed, which I was kind of surprised by. But I think we can probably put the hosting combo to bed. You turn out the lights, the kids are in bed. So yeah, I mean now you're trying to just win games. You're trying to win series the last two. The Big Ten series and schedule makers, for whatever reason, were able to line this up pretty well the last 2 series weekends, where you basically have the top 6 all playing one another, and everybody's separated by 2 or 3 games. So there's a lot of volatility there still, and kind of what the tournament can look like in Omaha. I mean, if you have a bad weekend, you can go easily from being tied for second down to like 6th. So Indiana certainly needs Nebraska's attention. They've got guys that can hit. I think their pitching is always, they've kind of messed around with their weekend rotation a little bit, but these for whatever reason, the games between Nebraska and Indiana for years have always been extremely competitive and pretty well contested. So it should be a good series, I would guess.
Yeah, and to boot, of the top 6, when only 3 games are from 1st to 6th, Nebraska's the only team that's not currently experiencing a winning streak.
Well, there you go.
All right, Bruntzy, go read some bedtime stories to Nebraska's hopes for hosting a regional, and we will talk to you next week.
Yeah, I might do Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs here. That might be the book to go with.
It's really more of a Good Night Moon guy, but that's okay. All right, Bruntzy.
Good night, stairs. Good night, chairs. Yeah, I got you.
Thanks, Bruntzy.
We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.